Past, present, future, where are we? A little bit of a personal perspective, but based on the UK as well. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's a picture of Cushing receiving his doctorate in Oxford in 1938, and Norman Dott was one of his first trainees in the UK to study with it there, and also to the right is Geoffrey Jeffson, who was really the founder of the SBNS in 1926. It'll be our centenary in 4 years' time. And he did a lot of work on artificial intelligence. So nothing is new in medicine. And he worked with Alan Turing, who was really one of the father figures of the concept of computers and artificial intelligence. And Hugh Cairns also a great one for logistics and prevention. He treated Lawrence of Arabia, who killed himself on a motorbike in the end. He was very keen to push for motorcycle helmets. I noticed that might be something you could do here. Well, our health service, as many of you know, is essentially a national health service. There is an independent service, and it's primary care, about 50%, and then the hospital consults and our specialist units. And we've stuck with that model. We have 36 regional units, each about 2 million population, and our unit covers this whole area that those of you know in the UK. It's the South East London coming right out down to sort of here and out to Kent into Market. And so it's about a 4 million catchment population that we look after. In the 1980s, we had about 120 consultants when I was appointed. Most units were 2 or 3 4-man units. Now we've gone massively up in numbers. But what we haven't done is change the location. We've kept to the regional system. It was quite tough then. And neurosurgical training really was very much an apprenticeship training. And I think many regret that. They look back to that with happy times. Today we've got much more structured training. About 400 consultants now, but again, they've stayed within the regional units. So we haven't dissipated to the district hospital sort of thing. Well, what things have happened since I started? Well, before I was at King's, I was at a hospital called the Brook. But there have been vast numbers of changes, but there's also been curious cycles of change of activity in neurosurgery. Now, the first thing, in my early stage, neurotrauma was big, because there were more head injuries, and the things that every meeting I go to infuriates me with head injury. The first slide should be prevention. If you can prevent a disease, prevent it, not like immunization. Do not let people have trauma if you can help it. So there's no doubt in my career, motorbike helmets, bicycle helmets, seat belts, have dramatically changed craniofacial injuries, etc. This must be pushed, because these injuries are incredibly expensive in care. We now have a sort of regional centre, and today the big problem is falls in the elderly, and you can often protect people by making sure elderly people keep away from the stairs, particularly after the pets. But if they fall down, they're a disaster. If the lead is here, remember our unit there, now we've got a helicopter on it, and this whirly bird brings patients in. So that hub and spoke model is used, and I think could be moved now to the urgent care of stroke. And in head injury, when I started, the Glasgow team under Professor Jennett, of course, were internationally incredibly pioneering and powerful, and that I was very privileged to train under the late Douglas Miller, who was worked for genetics of Graham Teaser and John Pickle. These are names everybody knows in hereditary surgery. And that was Sam Garrett, who sadly died, but was also very involved in that sort of work. And beside him is Philip Harris, who was Norman Dott's first chief assistant and the first to bring Cloud's procedure to the UK. Aneurysm surgery was very popular, and our meetings were always full of papers like subarachnoid hemorrhage and vasospasm, and that was really topical. And of course, Lindsay Simon, who was at Queen Square, as well, and he had a close association with Charles Craig, who interestingly highlighted John Gibbs at the Brook Unit. Nobody's heard of John Gibbs, but he was a very bright mathematical chap, and he was my predecessor by two, and he worked out that if you change the flow into aneurysms, they might well drop off. And that was what gave Charles Drake the idea of those slings to control the fusiform antivascular aneurysms. And he actually personally corresponded with John Gibbs, and very openly, because he was such an honest personality, it highlighted the work that John Gibbs had done. And actually, Tony Strong, my colleague, who is now sort of semi-retired researcher, was trained with Lindsay Simon and was our leading sort of consultant in neurotrauma, particularly, and subarachnoid and vasospasm work and research at King's. And we had two very good neuroradiologists came on board, and I might say that all three of those are very good golfers. They're very annoying. Charles Drake particularly, he sank the putt in the 18th within that. He pretended he was so nice and casual, but my goodness, he was contested. Now, Tony Strong has pushed a lot of work into ITU care of the brain injured patient, which can be transferred to many other conditions, whether it be stroke or any ischemic damage to the brain. And these microdialysis probes and catheters have changed from when I started. We were measuring ICP, if you remember some of the old ones, those ICP bolts that we used to put in. And things are much more clever nowadays. So there's been huge improvement. And of course, in my career, there have been several major trials. One in the vascular world that really changed things was the STN and C bypass trial. When that came out, there was such hope for this procedure. But really a lovely hypothesis, but sadly not as effective as we'd hoped. So that never took off. It could have been, but I think everybody thought it was going to be like coronary artery grafting. The ISAP trial, again, had a major impact in vascular neurosurgery. We used loads of different clips, and then the coins, the first vascular tip apex recoil at the Brook, I think the first one in London. And today in the UK, the range of coiling is probably about 75, I think up to 95% of patients. So a very big swing towards interventional, and clipping we do more in our unit. But I think the key here is that at the same time, CT angiography came in. And CT angiography absolutely changed the situation. Because the days of the radiologist saying, well, your chaps can't do this because they don't do the diagnostic carotid punctures for diagnostic angiography. That disappeared. And I really feel in some ways, certainly in the UK, we missed the opportunity as neurosurgeons to seize that workload. And I hope younger surgeons will go for that if they want to do vascular surgery. Epilepsy surgery is a curious phenomenon. The epilepsy surgery almost died out when I was starting my career as a trainee. But Murray Faulkner in the UK at the Maudsley, where I trained in South East London, he's just joined with the Brook unit, formed King's unit in 1995. And Murray Faulkner came from New Zealand, and Charles Polkey was my colleague and professor and teacher, and here he's opening our new ward named after him. And Richard Selway is my colleague who's taken over the mantle there, and Irfan Malik, who's with us, also works with the epilepsy team, so he's a very bright cookie. And they've done a huge amount, and of course epilepsy surgery now is absolutely exploding. Why? I think because of much more sophisticated neurophysiology techniques, digital neurophysiology, and I remember the early cases of pages of ECG stuff coming to theatre, and also the imaging, of course, plus stereotaxy. Again, functional neurosurgery, the most strange thing. But when I was starting, I indeed did one of these under John Rockwood's supervision. My chief at the work, Jeffrey Knight, was asked to do that. And I think we forget, neurosurgery survived because the psychiatrists wanted neurosurgeons to do psychosurgery, because they had so little power to treat severe depression. And this subcortical tracheotomy with yttrium seeds was used with a very clever stereotactic frame with the ventricular management for patients with intractable severe depression. Very controversial surgery, huge rows about it, but then came along the frame, the lead cell frame, which would be used in the CT scan. And suddenly people began to think, and just went back to starting doing stereotactic biopsies, and of course, moving to stereotactic lesioning, much more accurate, but we've moved from destruction to stimulation. Some of the new probes used by our team are very sophisticated, and this is clearly a rapidly expanding area, and we colleagues will teach you all of this yesterday. And it's a very exciting period. Even more exciting to me as a complete layman in all this stuff is the brain-computer interface work. And I think for young neurosurgeons, and I spoke to a colleague yesterday, this sort of thing they need to get into. This is going to be transformation. It's hard to believe what will happen, but I suspect it will be a dramatic change in the next 20 years, particularly in rehabilitation. What was the sleeping giant while I was working? Well, it was that huge giant spinal surgery. Massive increase in spinal surgery. I was involved in using, very kindly, Earth introduced, but we did publish the first use of a carbon fibre employee fusion cage in cervical disc surgery. And that basically got rid of the business of taking grafts from the hip, which was painful, and it replaced one of the very early ones with really good fusion. And that was some work that I was involved in. It's gone from sort of posterior instrumentation. Again, I was privileged to present the first of these cancer series of distal malignant cord compression when I was a senior registrar, and now we've moved from that to very clever pedicle screws, percutaneous techniques, etc., cages galore, and dynamic issues. You can have all sorts of dynamic. I remember seeing Ed Benzel and Hanson Ewan presenting this DOC plate, which was a dynamic plate. People don't understand what they're talking about. It allowed a little bit of subsidence. And it moved on to all sorts of devices that we know about, and many have sort of drifted in and out of fashion. Then we came along to sort of endoscopic techniques. Hijikata was the first in Japan in 1964 to do endoscopic discectomy. The things aren't happening, but Earth Magnetic in our industry has really been transformation in endoscopic disc surgery, great for the pharmaceutical improvement. And I think robotics will begin to take over some of the placement of all these things. Era of the microscope, lots of things. Era of the endoscope. Remember various tips from my colleague, but it does bring you there to what you want to see. This is a little bit of new sort of things. Basil Zabian, our pediatric neurosurgeon, just if it works, it may not work, that I don't know, but I'll leave that. There's a video of a fetoscopic repair of dural defects, which is very new. Neuro-oncology has exploded. As we all know, different things, line-land transformational mapping, all sorts of things have made that dramatic. But very much a Cinderella subject when I started. It was biopsy, radiotherapy, that's it. Klinger's techniques given us much better anatomy of the tracts. And nowadays we're doing very advanced mapping and the technical sort of things like tubular retractor systems for deep lesions, which we're doing at King's, and that's using a combination of all these things, trying to get them all together into your operating theatre. And sometimes you can do slick, clever things. This is just for those who do posterior fossil work. Fabulous beam mattress. That is fantastically useful for positioning people without all those clamps and all contraptions. Radiotherapy has dramatically changed too, and of course metastatic disease has brought the radiotherapists into our world. Hideously complicated reports now with genetic markers, and monitoring. What do we do? Well, we have multidisciplinary clinics, they're a great help. Lots of people involved in these, all our different groups have these MDTs. NICE, that you have heard of, has been a big thing for looking at cost and how useful are these techniques generally, should they be approved. That has come in, it won't go away, and they have various ways, but eventually whatever you do will get NICE approval, and if you don't have that, it's difficult, and it's cost effectiveness as well. The spine registries, for instance, the British Spine Registry has been very successful in different pathways. Huge, we've now got huge numbers on this, and so it's been almost 250,000 patients involved, but that's sort of the degenerative pathway, 130,000 in that, but many of them won't have their full follow-up. Women in neurosurgery, it's nice to see women in neurosurgery coming in. This has been a great problem. And I do pay tribute to my peer, really, colleague Anne Moore, who also became president of our society and vice president of the Royal College. And Anne has done a huge amount for encouraging women to come into the specialty of neurosurgery, especially. Some glitches on the way. As you go through your career, things can happen that you didn't quite think would happen, and they affect us all. Well, the first one, when I started out, was AIDS virus. Never heard of this. And then suddenly it came, and we had to face all these bizarre scans. We could get quizzed, what's that, what is it, should we biopsy? Thankfully, our physicians, scientists, and virologists have managed to work wonders for this, and we pay tribute to them. The next one was this thing. You may not have had some trouble, but bovine spondyloform encephalitis, CJD, was an absolute terror. It caused panic in the UK because trials were going to get into the food chain and children. So all the CCSD units were all shut down almost because they weren't up to standards. We had ours moved offside. But turned adversity to advantage. I was managed to snaffle the CCSD area, and that's what we got our new neurosurgical theatres. So always use something to your advantage. Sepsis then came in. There's a big worry with the antibiotics, and we all know how awful that was, and we've had a pretty big drive to stop that. Then, unfortunately, out of the blue, this nasty little devil came, and of course we all had a huge impact. We wrote up our work. We actually managed to keep neurosurgery pretty good. The urgent and seriously urgent cases, they all got done. We had very little big change of loss of life or anything because of lack of neurosurgery. It just pushed the waiting lists down. Training was badly affected. Training is really, you see their numbers, whoop, straight down during that pandemic. That was a concern, and we've got to catch up. Positive outcomes. Always think of something positive. What was good out of it for us? We started using telephone virtual clinics at Teams meetings. It's transformed our, so when you want to run an MDT, everybody can sign in wherever they are. And people have got used to using it and we have not gone back. It's so much more effective if you use it for the right reasons. There are more worries to follow, and the greatest worry you will express is tomorrow's final. And I'm sorry, but I don't think you're going to do well. Climate change. I'm afraid our young teenagers and children are all going to have a go at us about this, but we've got to stop polluting in medicine. I'm not sure we can do much about all this stuff because we know the big elephant in the room is the human population. That's the problem, and that's difficult to deal with. But there are things. I mean, I'm shocked to see that each year we produce about 10 tons of medical waste from our theatres and clinics. We need to do it. Some of these things are ridiculous. This was a gadget they handed me, a nurse, to prep the wound with plastic and chlorhexidine. I said, what do you need this for? For 30 years, you can see me there. I just put the swabs in the bed, clean, we'll let it dry and go and scrub up and then put the drapes on. And if you let it dry, that's what kills the bugs. Speak to any microbiologist. So you don't need a plastic thing like that, which probably costs a lot of money. We also have an aging population. So look on it, you get more worried about this as you get older, I might tell you. And we did quite a. Don't forget, you can do some things under local anaesthetic, including laminectomies. Does bigger mean better? I don't know. The institutions are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe for certain things. We work in King's, but we're surrounded by very powerful institutions. The Maudsley Institute of Psychiatry, world famous for psychiatry, huge amount of research in the institute. King's College, University of London, called Physiology, Biomechanics, everything else. Guy's Hospital, as you know, St Thomas's Hospital, opposite the house. They've got much better views instead of the Shard and the House of Parliament. So we're tied up with them as an academic health partner. Does it help? Well, we are. If you put that group together as an academic partnership, we're one of the largest in the world, and we are a fourth in the world in neurosciences in the top 10 citations. So it is powerful to get these institutions together. Over my career, what's happened? I don't think there's any doubt technology and knowledge perhaps have exploded. Outcomes have gone up, they're better. I'm not sure about surgical technique. It's harder for trainees to get them. They're very clever with gadgets, but the actual handling of tissues, I get cross with the trainees and for taking big meningioma. They all know, because I'm badging them, you're in the right plane. This is not a right around plane. I see them missing. And they don't handle the instruments. And what many of those old ones went through much more general surgery. You learn from other specialties how to handle the tissues. And I think that would be careful. But the other thing is that the principles don't change. The principles of what you're doing, decompression. There's no point doing spinal brace scientific or leg pain, whatever it is. If you don't do the primary constitute, you must decompress the neurological structure. If you've got a big meningioma causing brain pressure, you've got to take it out properly and relieve the pressure. So we have unexpected and expected changes, learn from history, always keep an open outlook. We must monitor what we do and get on top of that. Make sure you're involved in that. And be aware of our responsibilities to society and to patients, of course. And what happens to you as you go through neurosurgery, this is grants, and this is me a long time ago when I started, and this is what happens to you. You just get older. But I'm still enjoying it very much, my younger colleagues. And you're all most welcome to come to King's, come to us in the UK. And I'd like to thank you very much indeed. And once again, good luck tomorrow.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here first time speaking at a conference here in Pakistan. So my name is Khan Siddiqui. I'm a radiologist, practiced for a decade, were faculty at the US and multiple different hospitals. But in 2008, I had an opportunity to move to the industry, starting in Microsoft and then a bunch of other companies. I've had an interesting opportunity to be an engineer and a physician at the same time, and I've done a lot of different things around that. So academically, my background is in computer vision, machine learning, and AI applications in medical imaging, and you'll see some of that comes into what we do. I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Strategy Officer at Hyperfine, building the world's first portable MR scanner. So I'm talking about how do we improve access to life-saving diagnostic and actionable data at the point of care. So our mission really for Hyperfine was to figure out how to bring brain diagnostics that are single point in time, and in 90% of the world just doesn't have access to cross-sectional imaging, and how do we enable that? And that's where we are trying to come in and bringing this life-saving diagnostics and actionable data to the point of care. The journey of Hyperfine was very interesting. Jonathan Rothberg, one of the geneticists from Yale, had a very successful career, built the next generation genome sequencing that we use for COVID. The Abbott machines and the Thermo Fisher PCR test that you see were developed by Jonathan. And after his success, in 2011, he collected a bunch of different scientists, engineers, and physicians to think about what are the big problems and challenges that we should focus on and solve. And one of the things became, how do we do non-invasive point of care imaging across the board? The first company that started from that initial 2011 gathering was called Butterfly Networks. It's a point-of-care ultrasound that some of you may have seen it already. Since then, there have been 8 different companies. Hyperfine was the second one that was started in 2015 to figure out how do we get an MR scanner to a patient's bedside or in a community center in sub-Saharan Africa or even in Pakistan. If you think about the journey of MR, the first scanner here to see in the late 70s, early 80s, this is from the Aberdeen 64 millitesla scanner in the UK. And then since then, what had happened was Picker International, then GE Electric commissioned the first 1.5 Tesla scanner in 1986, and then arm race to build bigger and bigger high-field machines that requires a lot of equipment, power requirements similar to a nuclear submarine, expert technologists to use it, and arm race, like the way the mainframes used to be in computer analogy, started. And we came in to think about like how do we take the mainframe to laptop analogy to MR? How do we bring that MR that is more portable and easily accessible? And the idea here was not to replace the conventional imaging. The idea was to provide another technology tool in the arsenal of clinicians to diagnostics. You have applications of 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla scanners, even 7 Tesla scanners now, whiteboard scanners, intraoperative scanners, dedicated knee scanners, and this becomes a scanner that becomes a point-of-care device where it can be used by the clinician at the patient's bedside or wherever it is needed. This wasn't an easy task. It needed a very different thinking on how to think about MR. So if you look at traditional MR scanner, think of, if I use an analogy of car, like why didn't Toyota, Honda, or Ford develop first electric car? It's because they were stuck in the combustion engine mindset and just couldn't get out of it. Similarly, in MR, the first principle always is you need to have homogeneous magnetic field. And that's why each magnet that when it's installed is really built on site. And they do a lot of shimming to make sure the magnetic field is homogeneous. But when you think about a portable scanner that has to move around, you cannot have a homogeneous magnetic field. So we have to throw out the basic principle of what MR requires out the door and think about how will we solve this inhomogeneity of magnetic field and field distortions in software. And that was one of the main things we had to go through. The other issue that really comes into play is that requires a lot of processing power. And even 10 years ago, we just did not have the compute power to be able to do some of the things we were able to do. The second thing was how do you actually make it possible to plug in anywhere you need to? And that we moved to a permanent magnet-based technology so that we don't require a lot of power. So if you can plug in a coffee maker or a tea kettle, you can plug in our scanner anywhere is needed. The third aspect was how do you deal with noise in the environment? Typical MR room is shielded so that RF noise and electromagnetic interference doesn't cause any issues. So we had to invent a noise canceling technology that cancels out the environmental noise. So like you can do a scan right here in this room if you needed to. If you think of MR, we do sampling, right? So MR signal that is generated when RF pulse is applied and readout is happening continuously. But typical processing that happens, we sample data at a certain rate because, again, we don't have the compute power to be able to do more and more sampling. And with advances in electronics and computing and artificial intelligence-based techniques, we're able to now do what image processing, signal processing that was not possible before even 5-10 years ago. So this is an AI-driven system. We use a very different image reconstruction technique. We don't use what is called fast Fourier transform to reconstruct the images. We use a convolutional neural network to generate the images so they can provide diagnostic quality data from it. Commercially, we're focusing on neurocritical care scenarios, ER-based scenarios, and pediatric scenarios, but applications are a lot. We are a relatively new company. We got our first clearance in 2020, just after the pandemic started, so it was challenging to figure out how to commercialize this. So we decided not to commercialize in that year and do some more work on the device capability and did our official launch in 2021. So this is our second year, almost 18 months since we got. And it's pretty unusual for a company this early in the stage with a brand new product to be in a setting like Pakistan and trying to commercialize it. We are in 15 countries today, so commercially available in Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand. and the research and Pakistan, and research capacity in other places. We have a lot of grants-based work happening with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that has deployed scanners in sub-Saharan Africa, even in AKU, and Dr. Athar has access to that scanner. So, and as I mentioned, right, I mean, it's a brain imaging device today. In the future, there's more possibilities, but can we image anything that you need? Does all typical sequences that conventional MR would do. And a lot of researchers and a lot of people have started using different applications. So in the ICU, post-op serial imaging, people even put it in an ambulance to do imaging in a mobile vehicle, even in a van or a dedicated ambulance. Doesn't require the infrastructure that a CT-based mobile stroke unit requires. A lot of excitement in ECMO units and cardiac units with patients with LVADs, so that doesn't cause any interference with ECMO devices and LVADs and pacemakers. Stroke obviously is a very big application. I think Dr. Athar is pioneering the use of it in the OR, and then pediatric hydrocephalus, and a lot of the work is happening in multiple sclerosis and demyelinating disease imaging also. So where does it fit in? You know, when you think about our device, think of it more of a point of care device. So where does it fit in a typical workflow or a care continuum of a patient? It fits in multiple different spaces to be used in a diagnostic capability, to be used in a pre and post intervention capability, as well as in serial monitoring capability or prior to discharge capability. So that now, because it has easy access to get imaging and to see what is happening to the patient and not rely only on physical exam and looking at signs and symptoms of the patient, you can rapidly understand what is happening. Just to give you the extreme contrast of how the device is being used, the image on the left is in Malawi in a community rural setting, scanner being used. This was the only scanner in the entire country of Malawi at that time, used primarily in patients with cerebral malaria, but a lot in pediatric neuro-oncology also. And the image on the right is the ECMO unit in Johns Hopkins University, where the device is all the way at the end. Right there's the MR scanner. That's all this equipment sitting in the same room, causing no issues and no imaging artifacts or failure of any of the equipment. And just to show here Dr. Athar unit running in his, when he's doing imaging for these patients from at AKU here in Pakistan. So if I think of a current workflow, right, how does MR get utilized in current workflows, especially in a critical care scenario? You think of it, right? Somebody makes a decision, patient needs some kind of imaging, so it's either CT or MR. Then the patient has to be packed up, remove all the things that are not MR compatible, put on MR compatible things, transfer it down to somewhere where the MR is, usually sometimes in the next building over, then transfer the patient on the device, do all the imaging, then reverse all that stuff back. But most of the time what happens is the third pathway. It's too complex to do anything, let's just not do anything. So patient's too unstable, no imaging. We'll rely on that. So this completely breaks that paradigm and enables you to do imaging even for unstable patients that are not able to move and do faster treatment. I think I'm going to go through a couple of cases just to show some examples of where what we are seeing. So here's an 8-year-old girl in Karachi that presented with right-sided weakness while she was showering, was taken to the ER, and this was a CT done in the ER. In hindsight, you can probably tell there's low density in the basal ganglia on the left side, so something going on here. But the patient was too unstable, immediately moved to the ICU, and a few days later had a conventional MR that showed left basal ganglia infarct and complete occlusion on the MRA that you see on the left. Patient kept getting worse and was so unstable they couldn't get follow-up imaging to see what is happening, so they brought in the SOAP device in the ICU, and the stroke had expanded in this 8-year-old girl. And based on this, they realized something else is going on. What is the etiology of this? And ended up getting an echo done to find the patient has emboli going from the heart and causing continuous expansion of the stroke. So the scan was been used on a daily basis to see how the edema is resolving. As you can tell, the edema increased initially, causing herniation, and over time, patient resolved. Actually, patient was discharged and treated properly and doing well now. Here's another case. This patient presented with unknown onset of symptoms. MR, initially CT was done and wasn't unclear if the patient is candidate for thrombectomy or not. Very difficult to get the patient for MR at that time. SOOP was used, and this classically shows your diffusion flare mismatch on the right-sided MC, and fraud patient was treated and had a fair outcome. I think I'm going to do the last scan. This case is from MGH. 69-year-old presented with ER. CT showed a right thalamic interparenchymal hemorrhage. Patient was transferred to the ICU, getting very unstable, and the repeat MR was done in the ICU, and that showed right posterior diffusion abnormality, probably secondary to hemorrhagic vasospasm of the vessel. Patient then went through balloon angioplasty to remove that vasospasm, but unfortunately, patient did not survive this thing. So I think I'm going to stop here. There are tons of other cases to show too, but it was great being here. Thank you very much.